Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's so great to see so many people, some who I recognize and some who I don't. Um, so today's program is called How to Make Stress Your Ally. It's a co-presentation with myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Ellie Stein. I've just retired from a 35-year medical practice as a physician and a psychiatrist, working almost exclusively with people with myalgic encephalomyelitis, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, environmental sensitivities, chronic pain, and more recently, long COVID. And one of the things I've noticed over that time is that mindset, how we think about our life and our health, has a big impact on how we do our progress. And more recently, I've become aware of really amazing research that kind of gives a scientific backing to what I've been observing in my practice. So that's what led to the idea of this presentation today. Both Simon and myself are going to give you information that hopefully will help you shift your mindset about stress so that you can use it for your benefit instead of feeling like a victim of stress. We're each going to talk for about 20 minutes. My presentation is kind of the science background, so providing you the research evidence that mindset really can make a difference. And Simon, who's a very skilled hypnotherapist, is going to explain his more experiential approach and then give you an example of how he works with people to help them shift their mindset and increase their resilience to stress. So I think with that introduction, I'm going to share my screen and start my presentation. So how to make stress your ally. I guess I'm presenting this because I've had a really big shift in my own perspective. It's made an enormous difference in my life. I've never been a person super impacted by stress, but I definitely always saw stress as a negative. And all the messages you hear in society kind of reinforce that message that stress is bad for us. For the last several years, I've been learning about mindset and I've been experimenting myself with different ways of understanding and perceiving kind of my life circumstances. And I guess what I can say about that, I'm much happier, right? Now, when stuff happens to me, I don't take it as an imminent disaster. I have other ways to handle. And now I consciously, when an unexpected, potentially stressful event happens, make the decision to try to figure out what I can learn from it rather than being buried by it. So in the first part of my presentation, I'm going to talk about mindset in general and present some research to show you just how powerful it is. And then towards the end, I'm going to bring that back to the mindset about stress. And at the very end, I'm going to give you 4 steps that you can use to identify and shift your own mindset. So mindsets are unconscious views of reality. We're normally not aware of our mindset unless we make a point of kind of pausing and reflecting what we're thinking. Even though mindset is mostly unconscious, it shapes the way we think about the world. So for example, I could have the mindset that the world is safe, or I could have the mindset that the world is dangerous. I could have the mindset that my health problems are chronic, overwhelming, and will probably get worse and ruin my life. Or I could have the mindset that I could learn ways to manage my health problems and still live a good and meaningful life. And these unconscious beliefs that we have also influence how we behave, the actions that we take. So an example of this, it's a little bit of an older study, but they took a bunch of older individuals and they assessed what was their mindset about aging. They found that the people who had a negative mindset, who believed that aging was like a downhill slope, were less likely to bother to engage in positive health behaviors because they had the mindset it wouldn't matter anyway, and they died younger. So this shows that life mindset could actually be life or death. A negative mindset about our health might be that we feel like it's keeping us in jail, like the image on the left. And a positive mindset might be that the stresses we experience because of our health problems give us opportunities to learn and develop that we wouldn't have if we hadn't suffered the challenges. It's a very, very different perspective. So I'm going to present a few studies just to give you a bit of breadth on how powerful mindset is and how it impacts our biology. So in the first study, a group of seasoned smokers were given an e-cigarette. They were split into 3 groups. One group was told the e-cigarette had a low dose of nicotine in it. The second group was told it had a medium dose, and the third group was told it had a high dose. Now, as often is the case in these research studies, they were tricked. So in real life, everybody got the exact same dose. The only thing that differed was what they were told. After vaping the e-cigarette, the participants were given a difficult decision-making task, which activates a part of the brain which is acted upon by nicotine. The brain activity was measured in a functional MRI in real time while they were doing the task. It's a very gold standard objective test. And the brain activity of the participants varied depending on the dose of nicotine they were told they were given and not the dose they were actually given. So this is pretty mind-blowing. The people who thought they got the low dose had less activation in this brain area, and the people who were told they got the higher dose had higher activation. In fact, they all got the same amount. So the only thing that differed between the 3 groups was their mindset. So in another study, researchers looked at how mindset could impact body composition. They learned that hotel housekeepers, even though their work is quite active, right? They're vacuuming, changing sheets, pushing carts, cleaning bathrooms, etc. A group of hotel housekeepers believed that they weren't very active because by the time they got home from work, they were so tired they didn't engage in any intentional activity, like they didn't go to the gym or go for a walk or go work out. So they thought they were lazy and inactive. So the researchers split a group of these mostly female Latina housekeepers, this is in the US, into 2 groups. One group were told that actually their job put them above the Surgeon General's recommended activity level. That's all they were told. And the other group wasn't given any information. For the next month, both groups of housekeepers tracked their daily activities, and the researchers could see that they didn't change anything. They weren't told to change anything, and they didn't. They just went about their lives as usual. After 4 weeks, they were brought back into the lab and given some testing for weight, body fat, blood pressure, emotions, and confidence. The housekeepers who were told their physical activity level was in the beneficial range had lost weight, decreased blood pressure, decreased body fat, and reported feeling better and more confident about themselves and their bodies. This is because of mindset, because the researchers knew that nothing else had changed in their lives. So it wasn't that the one group started working out. That didn't happen. So this suggests that mindset can change our physical body composition and health parameters. So what about thinking? In another study, a group of subjects were asked to rate how well they had slept the night before. They came into the lab and they were hooked up to these fancy looking machines, which they were told could measure how much REM sleep, rapid eye movement, or dreaming sleep they had gotten. They were randomly divided into two groups. One group was told they got less than average REM sleep, and the other group was told they got more than average. Now, in real life, there's actually no way to measure how much REM sleep you got the night before. So the machine was a sham, and the researchers had no idea who had gotten more or less REM sleep. Then the subjects were told that REM sleep is really important and affects cognitive performance. And then they were given a series of difficult concentration and memory tests. The subjects who were told they got more REM sleep, even though we have no idea whether they did or not, performed better on the cognitive tests. And the subjects who were told they got less than average performed in the average range. So they didn't have that increased performance that the other people experienced. And the subjective sleep ratings that the people gave when they first got to the lab, whether they had slept well or not, didn't have any effect on their performance on the cognitive tests. So this means that mindset is more powerful than how much sleep you actually got. So consider this: stress is necessary for optimal health. The example that most people can relate to regarding this is exercise and muscles. So we all know that if we exercise, our muscles will get stronger. But what most people don't know is that in the near term, when we exercise, it actually damages our muscles. We get these little micro tears in our muscles whenever they're active. So the muscle cells notice that they have this damage, and they turn on all of their repair and strengthening mechanisms, and they get stronger than they were before. This is called hormesis, the body's ability to benefit from mild to moderate stress. And this hormetic capacity is true for physical and psychological stressors. And our stress-related beliefs and behaviors have measurable biological effects. So that's what I'm going to share with you next. As I mentioned before, when I turn on the radio or TV shows, I'm barraged by public health messaging that stress is harmful. We're told it causes mental health problems like anxiety and depression. We're told it causes physical health problems, cancer, immune suppression, weight gain, diabetes, even dementia. Now, all of this research is true. There's thousands and thousands of studies showing that stress has the capacity to cause bad outcomes. But it's not the whole story. What we're not told is that there's also research that stress can benefit us, as I've just described in the previous slide, and also that how we think about stress impacts whether it's beneficial or harmful. Stress is a normal, inevitable part of life, so it doesn't make sense that our bodies have evolved in such a way that stress is always bad. The impact of stress comes from the interaction. The impact of stress comes from the interaction between the stressor and our reaction to it. We're not the helpless victims of our circumstances. So this is a study that set out to specifically look at this. A group of first-year psychology students were told that they were going to give a presentation on a certain day before their entire class, and also there were going to be some VIP evaluators in the audience who, if they wished, could give them feedback. So for most students, this would be quite a stressful situation. Before this happened, the students' baseline cortisol was measured and their mindset. They were given a questionnaire that rates them either on a scale between stress is debilitating and stress is enhancing. Now, what's important to know about cortisol is it's good to get it in the Goldilocks zone. If it's too low, we're not alert enough and we're not on our best game. And if our cortisol is too high, we're wired, we're in fight or flight, and we also can't make our best decisions. So on the day of when the students thought they were going to be giving the presentation, their cortisol level was measured again. The students who rated themselves as believing that stress could be enhancing had a change in their cortisol levels. Those students who started out with a low baseline had an increase to bring them into the Goldilocks zone. And the students who started out with high cortisol, it came down and brought them into the Goldilocks zone. So the mindset that stress could be beneficial, and the students thought, they didn't actually end up giving the presentation, but they thought they were going to, their bodies reacted to their mindset by bringing their cortisol into the perfect range to function optimally. The students who had the stress is debilitating mindset didn't have this change. If they were low, they stayed low. If they were high, they stayed high. So this shows that our mindset about stress actually impacts our biology and how we are able to respond to it. So in summary, there's more research. This is just a small sample. Mindset affects brain function. Mindset affects body health and composition. Mindset affects cognitive function, how well we can think. And it also affects cortisol, our body's response to stress. Now, there's another study that shows that if you tell people this information, that stress actually can be helpful and that we can learn to react to it in ways that lead to improvement and growth, that's all that's necessary to help people have those positive changes. And so my hope for all of you today is hearing this information will open your mind to this possibility. So negative beliefs can cause negative consequences, and positive beliefs can produce positive results. So I want you to ask yourself, could your beliefs about your health and recovery be increasing or decreasing your progress? Could it be impacting your progress? So here are my 4 steps, and then I'll be turning it over to Simon to give you some more tools. First step is notice how your mind and body are responding to a stress. The stress could be anything. It could be a relationship issue. It could be a financial stress. It could be a health event. And notice it without judgment. Stress isn't a sign of success or failure. It's just what happens in life. So notice how your body is responding. Now, when our body responds to stress, it's giving us valuable information. We only get stressed if something's happening that we really care about. So ask yourself, what is underlying your reaction? What is it that you really care about? Try to identify it and then use your energy to address the underlying concern rather than wasting it trying to avoid the stress. So I love this image that one of my team found for me. The hot dog is spending a lot of energy trying to escape the fire. That energy could be used to try to address the underlying problem. So the next time you engage in a health behavior, that could be anything. It could be changing your thinking. It could be pacing. It could be working on diet or sleep, lowering toxic load, managing mood, anything that is in your goals. The next time you engage in it, notice your mindset and ask yourself whether it's aligned with your goals or not. So are you optimistic? Are you thinking to yourself, if I change my diet in this way, there's a chance I might be healthier? Or do you have the mindset, it's kind of hopeless because nothing can help me get better? If you notice that your mindset isn't aligned with your goals, can you adjust it? Could you find alternative, more open-minded beliefs and then practice them? Say them to yourself over and over until you rewire your brain to be open to the possibility that you might make progress. Now, one of my suggestions to help you with this transition is to read or listen to recovery stories online. There are people out there who have walked in your shoes and who are doing better through accessing courses and information that have helped them. And many of the people who have improved cite recovery stories as the thing that was the start of their recovery because it shifted their mindset. It helped them realize that improvement was possible. If you'd like to learn more about what I have to offer, my comprehensive online self-study course for people with chronic complex diseases like ME, CFS, FM, environmental sensitivities, and long COVID is called Pathways to Improvement. And as a gift, I guess, for all of you that are watching this webinar, if you decide to purchase the course and you use the coupon code on the screen right now, Pimenta 23-10, you'll get a 10% discount. And I believe that discount will be active until the end of this year, so until December 31st. The code is case sensitive, so it's all capitals, and you have to type it exactly the way it shows here. People who have registered for this webinar will get an email in a few days alerting you to the recording being ready because, of course, not everybody was able to make it today. And this information will also be in that email. So just before I finish, I want to show you the references just to show you I didn't make this up. It's real. Mindset really does have a big impact on our health. So I'm going to leave it at that and stop sharing and hand it over to Simon.
So thank you, Dr. Stein, and thanks for the invitation to present at this webinar. If I think about my takeaways from your presentation, one is not to believe anything that researchers tell you if you're involved in a study. The second is that we can change the way we think about stress. And I'm going to talk a bit about strategies for doing that. I'd like you to consider that the way we think about stress influences our experience. It impacts health outcomes. There's another research study by Alia Crum from Stanford where they showed a video to one group of people saying that stress is bad, another group of people, the video said that stress is good, and they measured the health outcomes 5 weeks after they watched the video. One group had more negative health symptoms. Can you guess which group it is? It's the group who watched the stress is bad video. So the third thing that can be impacted by the way we think about stress is our mind, because the way we think about things changes our brain. This is the science of neuroplasticity, that whatever we practice, we get good at. So I'm just going to share a few slides. So I talk about this equation, E plus R equals O, where E is the event, R is the response, and O is the outcome. So let's say the event is you're experiencing a dip, you're noticing sensations in your body. I generally call symptoms sensations because I find that word less emotive. So that is going to affect how you respond. You could respond to those sensations in a negative way, in a neutral way, or in a resourceful or positive way. Sometimes clients say to me, is it possible to respond to symptoms when you're lying in bed, sensations in a positive way? And I tell them the story of when I had ME/CFS. I was working with a psychologist and she asked me the question, what's something you'd love to do but don't feel you can because of the condition? And I said, I'd love to go clubbing. And she said, well, what if you rested for 2 days, then went clubbing for a few hours, and then just rested afterwards? And so I decided to do that. And over the next few days, probably the next week after I'd been out, I was experiencing, let's say, strong sensations, but I had a big smile on my face because I'd had such a great time. So yes, it is possible to respond to sensations, to be, having to rest because I'd overdone it and actually still being relaxed and happy. Okay. And consider that how we respond to an event, let's say a sensation, for instance, if I'm having a negative thought, oh no, this is really bad, then that's going to escalate my feelings of anxiety. If I'm feeling more anxiety, then that is going to drive the sensations, and then that can feed the loop. Okay. So what we practice, we get good at. And so we can get to the point where it's easier to do that response because we've trained our brain to do that. And as I say, it's slowing down the healing. And to look at it in a slightly different way, imagine you're at point A where you notice some sensations of anxiety in your body. If you say to yourself, oh no, I'm feeling anxious, my heart's beating, my palms sweating, then you're more likely to go to point B. And if you at point B, you do the same, you're going to escalate those feelings of anxiety. I used to experience panic attacks and I didn't realize that essentially this is what I was doing. Okay, there is good news. We can break this pattern, and I'm going to be talking about that in a bit more depth. So let's just stop sharing the screen for a moment. So I'd like you to consider this question. How often, when you experience symptoms or sensations, do you respond in a way that kind of escalates those feelings? Maybe you say so, oh no, this is bad. I'd like you to consider it's not your fault if you view symptoms as bad, because the medical model of health tends to view all symptoms as bad, whereas actually we're going to look at different ways of viewing symptoms. But consider if you are experiencing a sensation in your body, that might drive some emotion like upset, frustration. That might result in you going into your mind and chastising yourself, saying, oh, you idiot, you overdid it. Let me know if this is something you've ever done. Certainly it was something that that's a way I would be talking to myself when I had ME/CFS and when I'd overdone it. You might notice that you catastrophize. I often work with clients who say to me, when they experience a dip or a setback, they're saying to themselves, I'm never going to get well. And this just elevates those feelings of anxiety. And it can result in adopting behaviors that actually don't support the body's healing. So sometimes when I was in a dip, one of my strategies for kind of distracting myself from the upset, the frustration, is to watch movies. I often watched movies that were like action movies. They were overstimulating when I was already quite fragile, and that didn't help my recovery. Or I'd just push through. I'd keep going because I was just too frustrated with the situation. And I recognize, with the benefit of hindsight, that I could have responded in more helpful ways. So Anne says, I used to blame myself before I practiced pacing. So thanks for your feedback, Anne. It's good to know, other people might resonate with that. So Which of those do you tend to do? Chastise yourself, catastrophize, distract. Just put a 1, 2, or 3 for any of those that you do. Chastise for 1, catastrophize 2, distract yourself in unhelpful, limiting ways 3. What this means is that, and Barbara's saying 3, what this means is that another 3 from Diane. Oh, yeah, 2, 3. So a few numbers are coming in. So thanks for responding, 2, 3. What this means is that our window of tolerance for stress, symptoms, emotions is small. And my goal when I'm working with clients is to help them build their window of tolerance. So that it doesn't mean you're not going to experience stress. It's not, that you're not going to experience emotions or sensations in your body, but the goal here is that we can learn to experience those things without escalating them, okay, without feeding into that loop. So I want to share 3 analogies that can be helpful to help us reframe stress. So the first is the car analogy. Imagine you're driving along in your car and a warning light on your dashboard goes off. Okay, maybe it's the oil's getting a bit low. Shelley says, love the window of tolerance theory. Yeah, and we'll get on to how we build our window of tolerance. So that information, that's an event, your little light on telling you that your oil is getting low is flashing. So how do you respond to that? Well, some people might stress about it. Some people might ignore it. If you're clever, you could disconnect the bulb. Okay, so the bulb won't be lighting up anymore. But I'm sure you recognize that these aren't good strategies. But these are the strategies we tend to do when we have sensations in our body. Okay, I'd like you to consider that this information, the light going off, is useful information. It's a call to action. We need to take some action. Consider that stress, symptoms or sensations, emotions are also useful information, and some action is needed. Consider that your nervous system is like those warning lights. Okay, your nervous system knows when you don't feel safe. The problem is we often repress the stress, we repress our emotions. So repression is the unconscious pressing down of emotions, or we suppress our emotions. That's a conscious decision to not act on some emotion that we've noticed. If you're aware of Dr. John Sarno, he talked about the fact that if people were experiencing pain, symptoms, and there wasn't a discernible physical cause, he believed that the cause was repressed emotions and some action was needed. I think it's also useful to work with the suppressed emotions and also the emotions that we are aware of. For instance, someone might know they're experiencing anxiety, but not know how to shift it. And I speak as someone who used to be very good at generating anxiety, but we can learn how to do that. Second analogy, second way of looking at your nervous system, and I've got a prop here, is that your nervous system is a little bit like a pressure cooker, okay? When we don't feel safe, as I say, we experience sensations, emotions, and that is like that warning light, just to mix my analogies of the car, okay? These are signs that the body's in stress. And what can happen is if we repress or suppress our emotions, it's a bit like just popping them in the pressure cooker, okay? If we keep doing that, that pressure cooker starts getting filled up. And Peter Levine, who's a trauma therapist, says that repressed or suppressed emotions can be locked in our muscles, and that causes dis-ease in our body. Now, the next part of this is to recognize that the pressure builds and this dysregulation that causes dis-ease over time can lead to disease. Now, anxiety is this lid, all right? This is a symptom of the build-up of repressed and suppressed emotions. And so you may be asking yourself, well, how do we work with stress? How do we work with these warning lights? So I'll get to that in a moment. I've just seen a question, which is, what's the difference between repressed and suppressed emotions? So, for example, a suppressed emotion is, I might be having a conversation with someone and they say something and I notice a reaction. I notice I don't feel comfortable with what they've just said, but because I don't like conflict, I decide not to respond. If we do that enough times, then it can become an unconscious response. Okay. Let me know if that makes sense to you. Actually, it might be that we will deal with questions at the end. So maybe do ask your questions and we'll come back to them. So how do we work with this? Well, I want to share one more analogy, and that is the analogy of a computer. A computer has an operating system. I have this idea that humans also have operating systems. So we can actually be operating from a place of trust, so a trust operating system, if you like, or a fear operating system. Now, remember what we said about neuroplasticity. Whatever we practice, we get good at. If we practice being rubbish at generating fear, we can uninstall that fear operating system. We can upgrade our operating system. We can install the trust operating system. So I'm going to share a 3-step system, which is a very small part of my Building Resilience course. I'd like you to consider, have you ever had a challenge where you just responded in a resourceful way? And maybe you surprised yourself. Okay, what I would suggest is in that moment, you were operating from trust. Okay, you were connecting to that part of yourself that is wise. So let me know, is that something that's ever happened? You've responded to a challenging situation in a resourceful way, and that was an example of you running your operating system that runs on trust. Okay, so I'm going to guide you through a simple exercise. I invite you to close your eyes. Obviously, only close your eyes if it's safe to do so. So I'm getting some yeses. So excellent. Only close your eyes if it's safe to do so. But I invite you first just to bring your awareness to your posture. Just ensure that you're comfortable. You may choose to be symmetrical, to uncross your legs if you're lying or sitting. But just ensure you're comfortable and you can adjust your posture whenever you choose. I invite you to take a breath in, breathing in through your nose, as long as that's comfortable, into your belly and out of your nose. As you breathe out, allow your out breath to be a little bit longer than your in breath. When you do this, you're activating your parasympathetic healing state response. So first of all, we're just going to connect to that part of us that operates from trust. Okay? That part of you that has the capacity for wisdom. I'd suggest to you that that part of you is always there. It's like the blue sky. Sometimes the blue sky is obscured by the clouds. In the same way, sometimes we feel less connected to that part of us. But I invite you to consider what it would be like to just practice connecting to that part of yourself. That part of yourself has the capacity for what I call supervision, the capacity to spot patterns, particularly unhelpful or limiting patterns that are habitual or have been habitual up until now. For example, someone might notice, oh, every time I have a dip, I catastrophize, even though I do come out of it. So that wise part of us that operates from trust can choose different decisions, can choose to respond to events differently. And that's going to influence our outcome. So I invite you to consider that that part of you has the capacity for patience. You can embody peacefulness, playfulness. You might say this to yourself in a I am statement. I am patience. I am peacefulness. I am playfulness. I am pragmatism. Pragmatism is a really useful quality to cultivate. It's the ability to see the bigger picture and keep things in perspective. I am presence. I am acceptance. I am discerning. I have the ability to discern what's appropriate in the situation. I am calm. I am compassion. I am trust. Consider that you have responded wisely many times. How often do you remind yourself that this part of you is part of you? You are wise. What would it be like to remind yourself of that daily? So when we connect to that part, we can spot those patterns, those limiting behaviors. We can take care of the part of us that sometimes operates from fear. Imagine how you might respond to a child who is feeling upset or scared. You'd let them speak. You'd let them know you understood them, that you cared for them. And then you might help them shift their perspective. We can do this for ourselves. So the second step is to choose a new response. We can do this by assessing the situation. When you see a pattern which you recognize isn't serving you, you can recognize you don't have to reinforce the pattern. You can do this by asking some simple questions. For example, if someone's saying to themselves, I'm never going to get well, one of the questions they could ask themselves is that true? And that pragmatic part of you will recognize that you don't have a crystal ball. You can't predict the future. And you have the understanding that you can change the way you think about stress, symptoms or sensations, emotions. And that has a significant impact on your physiology. So the third step is to cultivate these new responses. And with practice, these new responses that we create can become our default. So if I have overdone it and I'm feeling upset, and my pattern has been in the past to say to myself, oh no, I'm such an idiot, I'll never get well. I recognize that I could respond in a resourceful way, to recognize that the stress is a signal, just like that warning light, and I can take inspired action. I can soothe myself. I might give myself a hug. Peter Levine talks about hugging ourselves. You can stroke your arms. You can use strategies to release emotions. So before this talk, I was just doing some body movement just to keep myself loose. Because in the past, the idea of doing this kind of presentation would have been really scary. We can shift our mindset. We can use a technique called reframing, which is finding ways of looking at things that's more resourceful. So, for example, a coach I work with called Brian Johnson said that when he felt a bit nervous about giving a presentation, he would say to himself, I'm excited, because he recognized that the feelings of excitement were similar to the experience of sensations of fear. But saying, I'm excited, is a more empowering statement. An exercise I get clients to do is the tiger exercise. I get clients to look around the room and ask the question, is there a tiger in the room? If there isn't, then we can realize this situation isn't life-threatening. So maybe giving this talk might be a little bit scary, but if I notice some sensations in my body, I can recognize that's an old pattern. I can reassure myself that I'm good enough. And even if I mess up, it's okay. I can learn from that. I'm not going to be thinking about this too much in 10 years' time. You might consider what you say to a friend if they were experiencing this dip. You might say, it's okay. You're human. This is an opportunity for growth. You can be like the scientist who decides to experiment. Edison did about 1,000 experiments to develop the light bulb. He didn't do the same experiment over and over again. He decided to do something different. Consider that healing isn't about not making mistakes, but it's about how we deal with mistakes. So consider that when film studios are making movies, they accept that they might have to shoot a scene more than once. So these are mistakes. So I invite you to now just bring yourself back. Allow yourself to learn whatever you need to learn from today's presentation. When you're ready, you can open your eyes and bring yourself back to the room.
Thank you so much, Simon. I could listen to you all day. I love your calm demeanor. I'm just like, ah.
You are welcome.
A couple things that are take homes for me from your presentation are that symptoms are communication, right? They're not good or bad. They're giving us important information. And then it's up to us to listen to the messages.
Yeah.
And the other thing I took home is I think we're both very keen and know the power of neuroplasticity, and using the decision to choose something different and then practice it is basically neuroplasticity to install the new operating system. I'm going to take that terminology. It's great. New operating system, new habits, new mindset. It's all possible.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're going to take a 10-minute break right now. But before we go into the Q&A, I just wanted to give Simon a chance to talk about what he has to offer.
Thanks, Ellie. Okay, so very briefly, I offer a course called Building Resilience. I'll just quickly share my screen and just tell you a little bit about it. So it is a 12-week course, and it's designed to give people the tools that I feel, based on my experience and about 14 years of working with clients, to help them navigate the challenges of having a health condition. So there are kind of 9 areas that we focus on. You can have a look yourself, and if you're interested to see what we covered. So what I talked about today was this CCC method: connecting, choosing, and creating new responses. But there are other areas, focusing on how to soothe yourself, strategies for solving some of the issues, again, touched on that a little bit, dealing with the fundamentals, approaching movement in a sustainable way, dealing with sleep, etc. Building that healthy relationship to yourself that we, again, touched on. Also building relationships with others that suit you, that serve you, and creating a plan for life that works for you. So if you're interested to have a look, the course does come as an online course that you can self-study and you can pay in installments. There's a 12-week course that starts in January. You can also do the training one-to-one. So have a look if you're interested. Got any questions, happy to have a chat with you.
Thanks, Simon. And I don't know, I hesitate to say this in front of everyone, but you also had a bit of a deal for people that sign up coming from the webinar, yes?
Yeah. So for anyone who does sign up, then you will get access to a month of group coaching. That, the full cost of that is £97. So if you do sign up for that before the end of December, again, you'll get the access to that, whatever course you do.
Great, thank you. So I'm gonna be the moderator for the questions. I'm really happy to see, so some people have shared in the chat that what Simon and I have shared has really resonated. So that makes us feel outstanding, like we hit the mark and gave people some useful information. So the first question I have is from Carol. She says, I understand the explanation of suppressing. Can you give an example of repressing? So I don't know if I can take the first stab at that. This is coming kind of from psychiatry. This is our bread and butter. So suppressing is typically that someone is consciously kind of pushing down their emotions because they judge for whatever reason. Either it would be too upsetting to experience them, or it might not be appropriate to kind of act on them in the situation. Repressing is usually unconscious. So it means you don't really realize that you've got these emotions flying around that aren't coming out. I don't know if Simon, your view is similar to that.
Yeah, and thank you for asking that question, because I saw it just before the break, and it's a great question, and I realized that maybe a specific example of that could be, and you may have experienced this, let's say I used to be a people pleaser, but let's say, I remember having a chat with a client who was very much a people pleaser, and they were talking about a situation where they experienced what I would say is unfair treatment. And I noticed that in that kind of situation, I'd feel angry. Okay. And they had no concept that a boundary had been violated. And they certainly had no emotion of anger. So that, I would say, is an example of when someone's repressed their emotions to such an extent that they're not even responding in a way that would be completely reasonable. So let me know, Carol, if that helps explain with a kind of concrete example of that. But that's an example, really. And certainly that's something I used to do. I was so good at repressing my emotions. I would notice some tension in my body after the event, but I had no conscious understanding of the process that went from that experience to that tension in my body. You're muted, Ellie.
Thank you. Sherry says everyone can benefit from a new operating system. I think even if we have a really healthy operating system, we can always fine tune it and improve it. So I would absolutely agree with you, Sherry. So there's a few people sharing their experiences, which I won't read out, but we really appreciate. So here's a question from Bev. How do we tease? Oh, I love this question. So I'd love to take the first stab at it. How do we tease out the symptoms one should not ignore or distract from, example, serious medical event, from those we should develop a different mindset towards? So my answer to this is in people like myself who have had ME/CFS, fibromyalgia, environmental sensitivities, we have gazillions of symptoms all the time, right? Probably most of you listening to this are never symptom-free. And so this is a really important question. How do I know when my symptom is really serious and I actually should go see the doctor or call 911 versus it's a recurrent, repetitive symptom that I've had enough experience with over time to know that it's not life-threatening. It's one of these ones that comes and goes. That's how I would differentiate. So if it's one of your chronic, well-known symptoms that you know comes and goes typically throughout your days or weeks, those are the symptoms that developing a different mindset towards or different reactions to may be helpful. But if you have a new symptom, a symptom that's more severe, or a symptom that's affecting, your vital signs like your heart rate, your breathing, you're in so much pain you can't function, then that would be a sign for me that you need some medical help. I don't know what you would say to that one, Mike, Simon.
Yeah, I think you pretty much covered it. If you're in doubt, consult a medical
Yeah,
professional.
yeah.
But yeah, if it's something that you just think is part of the condition, then I go back to the being the scientist, experiment, see what, there's more we could talk about here. But for example, um, symptoms can be a sign that we're not meeting our needs in some way. And, an example of that, I'm getting much better at just noticing, I think I've spent a little bit too long looking at a computer. I need to get up. I need to go and have a break. I need to go and have a walk. And in the past, I would just ignore those sensations, and I'd feel a bit symptomatic later on and not really know why. And now I have a better understanding of cause and effect.
Yeah, that's such a good point to bring up, that symptoms may be communicating something important. Like, I guess it's a bit of an art, right? Because sometimes my symptom of fatigue is because I have spent too long at something and it's telling me I need a break. And other times it might be an ingrained habit which isn't giving me useful information. So I think there's no black and white. And that I love the suggestion you gave of do the experiment.
Yeah.
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 So this is from David. How would one differentiate when a symptom is a communication suggesting the need for rest versus being an error message? So this is really actually kind of similar to the last question. So I think for this question, it would kind of be the same, right? Take your best guess, do an experiment with how you respond to it, and then see what the outcome is. So if I have a symptom, and this has happened many times, and I get distracted because I get working or the phone rings or something happens that takes my the focus of my attention away from the symptom, sometimes I realize that a period of time has gone by and I totally forgot about it. So that's an experiment that was accidental, but it gave me the confidence to know that the next time I get that same symptom, active redirection might be a good strategy because it worked last time. If I got distracted and the symptom just got worse and worse, then that might be a time to, get some medical advice. And then David also asks, is there a healthy way to mourn what one has objectively lost? So Simon, do you want to take a stab at that one? That's a great question.
Yeah, I think, what comes to mind when I think about that is, if you're familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and the stages of grief, that we just need to have some understanding that there are stages. The stages are shock, anger, frustration, bargaining, sadness, acceptance. So that's when we get to that point of acceptance, that's a shift from being resistant, which the other stages, there's some resistance there. And I remember being on a workshop with Tony Robbins, and he talked about a sixth step, which is creating anew. Okay, so we accept where we are, but we don't have to accept it as a forever thing. And in order for that to be the case, we need to think about what inspired action we can take to help close the gap between where we are and where we want to be. So I think it's really important I think it is possible to get stuck in the stage and to just recognize, okay, there is some resistance here. I'm not moving towards acceptance. And of course, this is a fluctuating process. It is a process, but it is important that we move through the stages.
I'm back in my office after 3 years of working out of my dining room table due to COVID. And I can't see this because I have my fuzzy background on, but I just put in the chat, there's a great book called The Chronic Illness Workbook, written by Patricia A. Fennell, Fennell. And she has adapted Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief to 4 phases of coping with chronic illness. And there's some nuances that are different, because if somebody's died, it's very final. Chronic illness has some additional challenges because you've lost things, but you never know. Maybe they're going to get better over time. There's a lot of uncertainty. So I would recommend her book. I talk about her phases in my manual, Let Your Light Shine Through, which is available on my website, mostly in session 4. Okay. Why? I love this. The question why. So in psychotherapy, we have a bit of a motto that asking why is often not that fruitful. So Catherine's asking, the why do I feel this way can be an unhelpful question when there's no clear answer, or even if there is, what do you recommend? So an alternative to asking why. Simon?
Yeah, I agree that it can be problematic. It can just take us in the wrong direction. I think the question I think is more useful is what? What can I do now?
Right.
What's
What's
a
the plan?
what's a
Yeah.
small step I can take?
Yes.
One of
And
the things I talk about is one of the things I do when I first start working with people is we identify people's wildly important goal. Okay, so what is the thing they want? And this is where it's useful to ask why. Why do you want that? So often people say, I want to be healthy. Why? Well, I want to be able to contribute. I want to be able to spend more time with people I love. And then we've got to the big, wildly important goal. Or it might be, I've got this mission that I want, this project I want to do. I was chatting to a client who wants to make a film. So that was her big passion. When we've got clarity on our wildly important goal, then anytime we're not feeling like we're moving towards it, maybe something's happened, we have taken a step backward rather than a step forward, then we can ask, okay, what do I need to do to take a little step towards that goal? Okay. And one of the things is that instead of focusing on our wildly important goal, we get a bit caught up in what I call our mildly important goal. Okay, so it might be that your mildly important goal is to understand why, this thing happened. But actually, that's not as important. It can be useful to get an understanding of things so that you learn from it and move on, but we can't always get a definitive answer. Okay, and therefore it's good to refocus on the wildly important goal.
And you talked about taking small steps, and in all my material, I talk about baby steps. And, it kind of leads in a little bit to the next question. If a person has been ill post-virally, even for decades, is it possible to overcome that given the length of time? So I'll say I was constantly moderately affected for 27 years before I got considerably better back in 2017. And many people that I've worked with over the years who have been even severely ill have made significant improvements. What kind of one of the new concepts that I've included into my Pathways to Improvement course is teaching how we can make biological changes or physiological changes using lifestyle modification. So most people think lifestyle modification is weak and second best to some kind of heavy hitting biomedical intervention like a new drug. But actually, the research in chronic illness shows very clearly in almost all chronic illnesses that the things we do every day, what we eat, how we pace, how we manage or respond to stress, all kind of things like that, actually are the most powerful intervention. And because they're within our control and they usually don't cost very much at all, it means it's possible, it's democratic. Most people can make changes in their daily life, baby steps to move forward. So I would say absolutely yes. Even if you've been severely ill for decades, it's possible to change. And the biology that supports my answer is how the body changes. So we have neuroplasticity, which changes throughout the lifespan. We have epigenetics, which means which genes are turned on and off in any moment. And that's plastic, meaning you can change throughout life. And then we have the microbiome, which literally changes within days of us changing what we eat. Microbiome are all the bugs that live in us. So it's absolutely possible. And the research is very supportive of that statement. And I know, Simon, from your own experience of yourself and coaching, I'm guessing you'd agree with that, that it's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. What came to mind is a client I worked with who was 70. She was in her 70s and she'd had, chronic health issues since she was in her 20s. And about a month after the training, she sent me 8 sides of A4 telling me everything she'd been doing as a result of doing the training and getting back to life. And I think the key is to just identify the factors that you can influence that are getting in the way. There's a free kind of audit training I do where people can just score some metrics and it gives them some ideas about, okay, this is an area I could focus on. So obviously, if anyone wants that, it's a free resource. Get in touch and I'll share that with you. But it's a way of just getting you to identify the things that you can influence. And I love what you said, Ellie, Dr. Stein, that, there are things that we can do. And I think that gets overlooked.
Can you just say, you just froze for that sentence.
Okay, there are things that we can do, and sometimes they're not very exciting things. Right. But it's really interesting. When I work with people, I'll ask them questions like, what time do you go to bed? They're telling me they're using NLP to work on symptoms. And I'll say, what time do you go to bed? I remember some clients saying 1 o'clock in the morning. And I said, okay, well, you're trying to address symptoms because you're going to bed at 1 in the morning. What difference would it make if you went to bed earlier? And they're like, oh, okay. And, one client did that straight away, shifted from 1 o'clock to 10:30. And after a week of that was saying, actually, I feel so much better. Okay. So, sometimes there are some easy fixes. Sometimes there are things we have to work at.
I agree. So Michael's asking the question, how do you take control of your thinking when you're depressed? Depression is a chemical thing in my body and mind and not just a mood disorder. So much harder to change your mindset when depressed. So just to talk about neuroplasticity, I'm reading this amazing book and it's sharing that when we take antidepressants, so things like Prozac, Celexa, etc. I think they have different names in different countries. So fluoxetine, citalopram, etc. it actually upregulates neuroplasticity, and it upregulates the metabolism of cells. So it turns out there's people thinking now antidepressants don't actually work because they increase neurotransmitters. That's what they do in the short term. The same day you take the antidepressant, your neurotransmitters go up. But anybody who's taken an antidepressant knows it takes somewhere between 4 to 8 weeks for us to experience a relief of depression. So obviously other things are going on in the body, and we now think it's neuroplasticity, and there's actually been studies showing that people who successfully respond to antidepressants have neuroplastic changes in the brain. And there's newer research showing we also have metabolic changes due to the antidepressants. And because we can make those changes without antidepressants, it actually suggests that neuroplastic practice could be a very powerful tool. In the people I've worked with teaching neuroplasticity over the past 10 years, many people are focused on a physical symptom like, say, pain or chemical sensitivity. But after they've been working for a few months, almost everybody reports improved mood and lowered anxiety. It's almost like a ripple effect. And so that tells me that neuroplastic practice is a very powerful tool for mental health symptoms. I don't know if you want to add to that, Simon.
All I'd say is, I used to work in mental health, and there was a chasm really between the approach of the medical profession towards depression, where the view was very much this is a chemical imbalance, to, a therapeutic approach, which, says, for instance, there might be factors that have contributed to this. We also know that, nutrition can play a part. We also know that exercise can have a dramatic impact on someone who's experiencing depression. So I think there is scope to take a kind of multi-pronged approach. And yeah, I would also agree with you that embracing a neuroplastic approach is part of that.
Right. I just want to acknowledge Annie's comment. So she says, I'm with you, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, Mari, the woman who asked if it's possible to recover after years of illness. And Annie's saying she's in a similar situation, being bedridden, and she asks again, is there hope? I think there is. So I'm very cautious to never give people false hope and make big promises. But I've been in this medical practice specifically focused on these disorders since 2000. So that's 23 years of experience with thousands of patients. And I've seen so many people improve. Some people improve a little bit, some people a moderate amount, and some people make really significant gains. But I have kind of a mantra in my course, which is improvement is the rule, not the exception. So I believe most people can make some improvement if they know what kind of strategies to try. And that was really the motivation for my Pathways to Improvement course, is to curate everything I've learned and experienced over my own illness history, which is 35 years, to try to make it, to kind of winnow down and share the strategies that are the most effective for the most people, in the hopes that it can help you recover faster than me, because I wasn't on the speedy recovery pathway. David is putting a link here for griefyoga.com, so thank you. And all of these references from the chat will be posted with the video on my webpage. I'm not sure about Simon.
Yeah, can do.
Okay. I think we're getting towards the end here. So here's someone saying, I absolutely agree that little by little we can change. In 7 months, She went from homebound to 5,000 steps and enjoying going out with friends, all with mindset and physical baby steps, etc. So that says it stronger than we can say it. Thank you, Judy.
Amazing.
I think we're pretty much at the end here. Shelley from Ontario is saying, I will send in my story to your website. I'm feeling so much better these days, and I need to share how. Much of what your presentation is exactly what I've been doing. So I would just say, Shelley, please send your story, and I may put Michael in touch with you because we're actually trying to collect stories of people that have recovered for exactly this reason, to share them so that people who are really struggling can hear that it is possible. And of course, we're all different. So the more stories, the better, so that people can find a story of someone that's similar to them. Oh, here's a question from Daria. Is chronic pain and chronic other symptoms psychosomatic? So I would love to address this. This is one of my pet peeves in the field. If not, can you explain why? What do you think about Dr. Howard Schubiner's approach for treating chronic conditions? So psychosomatic, is something I spent a lot of time thinking about as a psychiatrist. And my understanding of the term is that it's kind of like when we were talking about repressed emotions, that if you don't experience your emotions, there's a belief going back to Freud and even earlier that those emotions would manifest as physical symptoms. I believe that can happen, but I do not believe that it's always the case. I've read Dr. Schubiner's book, and he's very, respected and skilled and has a lot to offer. But like John Sarno, who Simon mentioned, he seems to believe that virtually all chronic pain is due to repressed emotion. He does mention, to be fair to him, that it's not always the case and that not everyone has to do the deep psychological work, but his program is very psychologically based. In my own opinion and my own neuroplasticity program, I focus on the science and I don't make any assumptions about why people fell into the habits they fell into. And my observation working with, so many people over the years is what you need to do is change your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors and build new habits, new mindset, new operating system. And it doesn't necessarily matter the cause of why you got into the habits in the first place. Now, the one exception to that rule might be people who have experienced very significant trauma. Whenever we are in a situation with very strong emotion, whether it's positive or negative, that augments or increases neuroplasticity. And that's why trauma habits or patterns, reactions are so hard to change, because the incredibly strong fear that happens at the time you experience the trauma really hardwires those connections strongly and makes them harder to change. So for some people who have a trauma history, doing some mental health or psychological work can be extremely helpful. But I differ from Dr. Schubiner because I don't think it's mandatory. I look at myself, and when I used neuroplasticity to address my chemical sensitivity, it went away. I didn't have to look at the deep, dark secrets of why it happened or why am I sensitive. I know why I'm sensitive. I have bad genes, right? But despite those genes, which haven't changed, neuroplasticity has freed me from those symptoms. That's a very long answer because it's something I've thought a lot about. And it's so, excuse me, it's so controversial in the field because unfortunately, most people use the word psychosomatic as a derogatory term or a way of what's the word, like invalidating the person's experience and invalidating the biology which is perpetuating the symptoms. I don't know if you want to add to that, Simon.
Yeah, not too much. It is a term, I remember a while back just looking up definitions, and one of the definitions, I've written them down here, I've got a list of definitions of words, is where mental factors make illness worse or even cause them. What I would say from my own experience is that certainly our psychology can make our symptoms worse. I'm aware of someone in my family who has, some physical issues with their spine. It's very clear that when they're having a good time, they're so much better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm all for, again, going back to the experimentation rather than being dogmatic and giving dogmatic answers. I like something that another hypnotherapist said is, let's see what's possible.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I think we're going to try to wind up here. So there's just a few more questions left. So I'll maybe take 4 more questions. Bernadette is saying viruses are my biggest challenge because they cause flare-ups. What's the best way to I'm going to apologize for my voice. I've lost it apparently. What's the best way to deal with this both physically and mentally? And my answer to that would be self-management. So all the things that Simon's talked about that we do to look after ourselves, right? Getting enough sleep, diet, the right amount of activity, managing emotions, managing toxic exposures, coping with stress. That's kind of my whole Pathways program is all about how to look after our minds and our bodies well enough that our body can then start healing and not be so sensitive to viruses. How does one prepare for a necessary triggering experience like a vaccine? I think it would be a bit of a broken record. So I'll just say to David, who's asking the vaccine question, Nancy Klimas, very experienced ME physician who's at, I can never remember the exact name of the university, but it's in South Florida. If you look her up, she's got a great strategy to prepare for vaccines. And the strategy mostly involves, it's for people who have MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome, who of course are the most likely to have an adverse reaction. And she talks about using kind of loading with antihistamines or natural mast cell stabilizers like quercetin as something that helps some of her patients manage vaccines. Last question here. Can psychotropic drugs cause a dysregulated nervous system? I came off SSRI and benzo 9 years ago and haven't been the same. I do believe the experience coming off the drugs has dysregulated the nervous system. And then Helen adds, I have a history of complex trauma and find neuroplasticity practice hard to do. I think that's an unanswered question. I was on a call recently where someone shared a paper suggesting that SSRIs can have long-term effects on the brain. And I hadn't seen that paper before, but it looks, like it was a pretty legitimate study. So I think in psychiatry, just to criticize my own profession, we tend to focus on the positive outcomes and we tend to ignore potential side effects. And this has been an unanswered question in the field for decades. So SSRIs have been around for 30 years. And I think nobody's looked at it really carefully. So I think it's definitely possible. I think we should leave it there just due to time. Is there anything else you want to add before we close? Oh, thank you. Paul just put in the chat, Nancy Klimas is at Nova Southeastern University Institute for Neuroimmune Medicine. Thank you so much. And we'll put that in the notes. Any last words, Simon?
Well, just if I can very quickly just answer Elaine's question from
Mhm.
earlier, which was what would be some examples of constructive distractions? I think someone did respond to that to
Yep.
say do stuff you love, like someone mentioned cross stitching. But anything, I do a little exercise, which is a meditative exercise, which relates to some of what I went through with you. I might just go through those qualities that I mentioned, patience, etc. So there's a whole list there. You can create your own list. And I just meditate on each word for a little while. If I notice I'm um, out of sorts, off balance, rather than doing that old destructive behavior, that's something I might do. I might just meditate for 1 minute, do some qigong. So use your judgment. I might listen to some music or a guided relaxation. So there's just a few examples. I did post a list of these things on my TikTok profile, so check that out. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of food for thought.
Thank you so much, Simon. It's been a pleasure to do this collaboratively. I think we have a really nice mix of different but complementary skills. So I think people are appreciating it looking at the comments. Thank you to everybody who joined us. Way more fun when we have such interesting questions to discuss. And just a reminder, it is recorded. It will be posted both on Simon's pages and my pages, and you'll get an email early next week, hopefully notifying you of how to access. So I think we'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stein. Thank you,
You're welcome.
everybody.